At my sister's wedding, she mocked me in her speech. My sister is a single mother unwanted by anyone. The room laughed. My mom added, she is a used product. Dad covered his mouth to stifle a chuckle. Then the groom stood up and grabbed the mic. The room froze. My name is Maya. I am 31 years old, and I raise my 6-year-old son Leo completely on my own. My sister Chloe is 28 and the undeniable golden child of the Caldwell family. Today was supposed to be her ultimate triumph. She was marrying Julian Sterling, a 32-year-old heir to the Sterling real estate empire. My parents, Patricia and Marcus, had spent their entire lives pushing me aside to make room for Chloe. They constantly reminded me that as a single black mother with a deadbeat white ex-husband named Travis, I was the ultimate failure. The reception was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above hundreds of wealthy white guests from the Sterling family side. Meanwhile, I was seated at table 42, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Waiters constantly bumped my chair as they rushed past with trays of filet mignon. I did not complain. I simply sat there sipping my sparkling water and watching the show. Chloe tapped her champagne glass with a silver spoon. The clinking sound echoed through the massive ballroom, and the chatter died down. She stood at the head table looking radiant in a custom designer gown. Julian sat beside her looking incredibly pale and distracted by his phone, but Chloe did not notice. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying a fake sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Tonight is about perfect matches. It is about finding your equal." I look around this room and see so much success. Then she looked directly at me, sitting alone in the dark corner. Her smile sharpened into a malicious smirk. "Of course not everyone is so lucky. Take my older sister Maya, for example. She is a single mother unwanted by anyone. She really serves as a great reminder of what happens when you make bad choices." The silence in the room was deafening. A few gasps escaped from the groom's side of the room, but the wealthy socialites quickly turned them into muffled giggles. The Sterling relatives whispered behind their hands, casting pitying and disgusted glances my way. I could feel their judgmental eyes burning into my skin. I expected my parents to intervene and show some basic decency. Instead, my mother Patricia raised her glass of expensive wine and shouted across the room, "She is a used product. What do you expect?" Laughter erupted from our family tables. I looked at my father Marcus, hoping for a shred of defense. He just covered his mouth with his hand to stifle a loud chuckle, shaking his head as if my existence was a hilarious joke. They were so eager to tear me down to make Chloe look like the ultimate prize. I did not cry. I did not run out of the room. I slowly cut a piece of my steak, chewed it, and took another sip of my drink. I knew something they did not know. I knew exactly why Julian looked like he was about to vomit right there at the head table. Julian suddenly stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. The loud bang silenced the laughter immediately. He snatched the microphone out of Chloe's hand. His hands were shaking violently. He was clutching a thick manila folder that his assistant had handed him just moments before the speeches began. "Julian, what are you doing?" Chloe asked, her voice dropping its sweet tone. "Give that back to me right now." Julian ignored her completely. He stared at the folder, then looked directly at me, sitting by the kitchen doors. His breathing was heavy, echoing through the microphone and filling the silent ballroom. "She is not a used product," Julian roared, his voice shaking with absolute terror and rage. Every single person in the room flinched. He turned to face Chloe, his eyes wide with panic. "Are you completely out of your mind? Do you even know who that woman is?" Chloe crossed her arms, looking confused and annoyed. "She is my pathetic sister Julian, you know this. She works some boring office job and lives in a tiny apartment. Stop ruining my perfect day." Julian slammed the folder down on the head table. Papers spilled everywhere, revealing financial statements and legal contracts with bold red confidential stamps. "She is M. Caldwell," Julian shouted into the microphone. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Capital. She is the sole anonymous investor who has been keeping the Sterling Corporation from completely going bankrupt for the past 2 years. My mother dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the floor, spilling red liquid everywhere. My father stopped laughing instantly. His face went entirely pale. Julian grabbed the microphone with both hands. His voice cracked as he continued speaking to the entire ballroom. My family business is drowning in debt. We are finished. Caldwell owns 80% of our liabilities. We begged her for a bailout contract to save us from foreclosure. She agreed to sign it today. But my assistant just handed me this urgent notice from Apex Capital. Julian turned back to my sister, his face twisted in absolute disgust and horror. Because of your speech, Chloe, because you just publicly humiliated the only person holding our survival in her hands, the bailout has been completely withdrawn. Caldwell just pulled the funding. She is liquidating our assets first thing tomorrow morning. The wealthy Sterling relatives gasped loudly. Several board members from his family company stood up in pure shock, knocking over their drinks. Julian tossed the microphone onto the table, where it let out a loud, piercing screech. You did not just insult your sister Chloe, you just bankrupted my entire family. I remained perfectly still, watching the absolute chaos unfold before my eyes. The haughty relatives who had been laughing at me moments ago were now clutching their pearls and staring at me with pure terror. My mother looked as though she had stopped breathing entirely. My father was gripping the edge of his table, his knuckles completely white. Chloe just stood on the stage, her mouth hanging open in silent disbelief as her perfect fairy tale shattered into a million unfixable pieces. I slowly took one final satisfying sip of my sparkling water. The microphone hummed loudly on the cold marble floor. Julian walked down the aisle. He completely ignored both of my parents. His face was a mask of pure terror. Chloe finally unfroze and stumbled down the altar stairs. "Julian, wait!" she cried out. "You cannot leave me here." He shoved the oak doors open, disappearing without a backward glance. The wealthy Sterling relatives panicked. Older white men pulled out phones, frantically dialing their brokers. Women grabbed their designer clutches, rushing toward the exits. In less than 2 minutes, half the ballroom had emptied out, leaving my sister standing alone in the middle of the dance floor in a wedding dress she could no longer afford. I remained in my seat at table 42. I placed my white linen napkin on the table and prepared to leave. But before I could even stand up, my mother Patricia came charging across the room. Her face was contorted with a mixture of sheer panic and unhinged rage. My father Marcus was right behind her, his fists clenched at his sides. Instead of apologizing for calling me a used product, minutes ago, my mother slammed her hands onto my table, rattling the silver cutlery. "What is wrong with you?" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing in the empty room. "Are you completely crazy? Get up right now and go after him." I looked directly at her blankly. Go after who exactly? "Julian, you ungrateful child!" she yelled, grabbing my wrist with her sharp nails digging into my skin. "You tell him that the investment deal is still on. You tell him that Apex Capital will transfer the bailout funds to the Sterling accounts immediately. You are going to fix this and save your sister's wedding right this second." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The absolute delusion was staggering. I had just been revealed as a multi-million-dollar financial executive, the silent force keeping this entire event afloat. Yet in her eyes, I was still just the scapegoat, obligated to sacrifice my own life and resources to secure Chloe's proximity to a wealthy white family. I slowly looked down at her hand gripping my wrist. Then I looked back up into her frantic eyes. "Let go of me," I said softly, but with enough ice in my voice to make my father take a step back. Marcus slammed his hand against an empty chair. "Do not speak to your mother that way, Maya. You have been hiding this massive fortune from us for years while we struggled to pay for this extravagant wedding. You owe us. You owe Chloe. Now get on your phone, authorize the wire transfer, and fix this mess before the Sterlings cancel the marriage certificate entirely." I yanked my arm free. "I do not owe you a single dime," I replied slowly, standing up to my full height. "You spent 30 years treating me like a burden. You shoved me in a dark corner tonight and laughed while your golden child humiliated me in front of hundreds of strangers. You called me unwanted, so why would I spend my money to buy a husband for a woman who absolutely despises me? Because she is your sister, Patricia shrieked, spit flying from her lips. Because this family needs that connection to the Sterling Empire to survive. You are going to fund them, and you are going to do it now, or you are no longer part of this family. I smiled. The threat of being kicked out of a family that had never truly loved me was almost comical. I was never part of this family, Mom. I was just the background scenery you used to make yourselves look better to your country club friends. I raised my hand and signaled the two large security guards standing by the kitchen doors. Gentlemen, I said, clearly these people are harassing me. I would like an escort to my car. The guards stepped forward. Patricia and Marcus backed away, their faces twisting with helpless fury as they realized they had absolutely no power over me anymore. They could not force me into submission, and they could not bully me into opening my checkbook. Suddenly, a loud scream ripped through the air. I turned to see Chloe charging across the ballroom. She had hiked her heavy dress up to her knees, and her face was red and streaked with ruined mascara. "You ruined my life!" Chloe shrieked, lunging at me with her arm raised high. She aimed a vicious slap right at my face, but her heavy dress caught on a chair leg. She stumbled, and her hand swung wildly through the empty air, completely missing me. She crashed into the table, knocking over a pitcher of ice water that spilled all over her expensive bodice. One of the security guards quickly grabbed her by the arm, pulling her back before she could try to attack me again. Chloe struggled against the guard, looking completely deranged. "You think you won?" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure malice. "You think because you have money, you can just destroy my happiness and walk away? Well, I have a huge surprise for you, Maya. I knew you were acting suspicious lately, so I made a backup plan." I stopped and looked at her. Her venomous smile made my blood run cold. "I sent a text message 30 minutes ago." Chloe hissed, her eyes wide and manic. "I contacted Travis." My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. Travis was my abusive, deadbeat white ex-husband who had not paid a single cent of child support in 5 long years. "That is right," Chloe laughed, a harsh, breathless sound. "I told Travis exactly where you live and that you leave the back door unlocked for the nanny. He is on his way to your house right now to snatch Leo. You are going to lose your son, you miserable failure." The threat echoed in the grand ballroom, but I did not stay a single second longer to listen to Chloe scream. I turned my back on my sister and walked straight out of the hotel doors. I handed my valet ticket to the attendant, and within minutes I was speeding down the highway toward my neighborhood. Travis was a nightmare I thought I had buried 5 years ago. He was a lazy, arrogant man who spent our entire marriage draining my bank accounts and breaking my spirit. He never paid a dime of child support. He never sent a birthday card to our son Leo. Chloe knew exactly what she was doing when she contacted him. She wanted to hit me where it would hurt the absolute most. I pulled into my quiet suburban street, and my blood immediately boiled. Parked right in front of my driveway was a rusted pickup truck. Standing on my front porch was Travis. He wore a smug smile and a wrinkled leather jacket. Beside him stood a short, balding white man holding a cheap briefcase. I slammed my car into park and stepped out onto the driveway. I marched straight up my walkway, keeping my eyes locked on Travis. "Look who finally decided to show up," Travis sneered, stepping forward to block my front door. "You look nice, Maya, dressed up for a wedding while you leave my son locked inside with a babysitter." "Get off my property, Travis," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "You do not have the right to be here." "Actually, he has every right," the balding man chimed in, puffing out his chest. "I am legal counsel for your ex-husband. We received a very concerning message from your sister tonight. She expressed deep fear for her nephew's safety, claiming your living environment is highly unstable and that you are prone to severe mental breakdowns." "That is right, Maya. Chloe told me everything. You are out of control. I am here to take my son. A stable father is much better than a crazy mother who ruins family weddings. I am taking Leo tonight, and my lawyer here is going to file for full emergency custody tomorrow morning." A sleek black sedan pulled up sharply to the curb right behind my car. The heavy car doors swung open, and my parents, Marcus and Patricia, stepped out. My father walked straight past me and stood right next to Travis. He patted Travis on the shoulder, giving him a firm nod of solidarity. My mother stood behind them, crossing her arms and looking at me with pure disdain. "What are you doing?" I asked, staring at my father in absolute disbelief. "I am fixing the disaster you created," Marcus said, his voice dripping with authority. "You humiliated us tonight, Maya. You embarrassed the Sterling family, and you ruined your sister's life. Now you are going to make it right." Patricia stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Chloe is inconsolable right now. Her entire future is destroyed because of your selfish behavior. But your father has come up with a solution to save this family." Marcus looked down at me as if I were a piece of dirt on his shoe. "It is very simple, Maya. You are going to transfer full executive control of Apex Capital to me. You will sign over the managing rights so I can personally authorize the bailout funds for the Sterling Corporation. Once the money is wired, Julian will come back to Chloe, and the wedding will proceed as planned. And what happens if I refuse?" I asked, keeping my face completely blank. Marcus smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "If you refuse to hand over the company, I will stand in family court right next to Travis. Your mother and I will testify under oath that you are mentally unstable and unfit to be a mother. We will confirm every single lie Chloe told them. We will tell the judge that Travis is a wonderful father, and we will make sure he gets full custody of Leo. You will lose your son forever, Maya." Travis laughed loudly, rubbing his hands together. "You hear that, Maya? Your own parents are willing to back me up. You have no way out of this. Give your daddy the company or say goodbye to the kid. It is your choice." They thought my love for my son would force me to hand over the financial empire I had built with my own bare hands. I did not blink. I did not shed a single tear. I slowly reached into my designer purse and pulled out my phone. I pressed one single button on my screen and held the phone by my side. I looked directly at Travis. "You really should have done your research before you tried to ambush me," I said softly. Suddenly, the blaring sound of police sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. Red and blue lights flashed down the street, approaching at high speed. 4 heavily armed officers jumped out of their vehicles, running straight toward my front porch. The lead officer grabbed Travis by the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him against the brick pillar of my porch. He kicked Travis's legs apart and immediately pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. Travis yelled out in shock as the cold steel snapped shut around his wrists. I took a slow step forward, folding my arms across my chest. I smiled, a dark, freezing smile that made my mother actually shudder. "I forgot to mention something very important, Travis," I said, watching him squirm in the handcuffs. "This house does not belong to me. The deed is officially registered under a private trust fund owned entirely by Leo, and since a judge granted me a Level 1 permanent restraining order against you 5 years ago, you are legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of any property owned by my son." I thought the worst of the storm had passed after Travis was arrested outside my home last night. I was wrong. The real nightmare started at 6 the next morning. My phone vibrated off my nightstand, hitting the hardwood floor with a loud clatter. I groaned and picked it up, rubbing my tired eyes. My screen was flooded with notifications. Thousands of alerts from Instagram, Twitter, and local news platforms blinked incessantly. I opened the first link sent by my assistant at Apex Capital. It was a highly edited video of my sister Chloe. She sat on her pristine white living room floor, wearing no makeup and an oversized sweater to look as fragile and innocent as possible. Fake tears streamed down her face as she stared directly into the camera. She had posted it at 3 in the morning, and it already had 4 million views. "Hi, everyone," Chloe whispered, wiping a fake tear from her cheek with trembling fingers. "I am making this video because my heart is completely shattered. Yesterday was supposed to be the happiest day of my entire life. I was supposed to marry the man of my dreams. But my older sister Maya destroyed everything. She has always been bitterly jealous of my happiness and success. She could not stand seeing me in a beautiful interracial relationship with an amazing white man. So she used her dirty money to bribe my fiancé. She forced him to leave me at the altar just to watch me suffer and cry. I stared at the screen, feeling my blood boil hotly in my veins. The comments underneath the video were absolutely brutal. Thousands of complete strangers were calling me a bitter baby mama, a jealous monster, and a ruthless criminal. Chloe had spun the narrative, perfectly framing herself as the tragic victim of a hateful older sister who hated interracial love. She knew exactly what buttons to push to make the internet mob attack me blindly. I quickly got Leo dressed and fed him his favorite breakfast. I kept my face calm and cheerful, not wanting him to sense my simmering anger. I drove him to his exclusive private elementary school, hoping to drop him off quickly and handle this public relations disaster from my quiet office. But the moment I pulled into the school parking lot, I realized the damage had already spread to my real life. A group of wealthy suburban mothers stood near the front iron gates, clutching their overpriced coffees. They stopped talking the second I stepped out of my car. I held Leo's hand tightly and walked toward the entrance, holding my head high. The nasty whispers started immediately. "That is her," one mother hissed loudly enough for me to hear. "The one from the viral video who ruined her own sister's wedding. I heard she is involved in illegal shady investments. We need to call the principal immediately. I do not feel safe having her son around our innocent children. She is clearly unhinged and dangerous." I ignored them, gave Leo a tight hug, and watched him walk safely inside the brick building. I turned around to head back to my car, but my path was completely blocked. A white news van was parked aggressively across 2 parking spaces. A reporter with a microphone was rushing toward me, followed closely by a cameraman. And walking right beside the reporter, acting like a heartbroken victim, was my own mother, Patricia. "Maya Caldwell," the reporter shouted, shoving the microphone into my personal space. "Your sister's emotional video has sparked outrage across the country. Do you have anything to say about the allegations that you used illicit funds to sabotage her marriage?" I looked at Patricia. She wore a dark, mournful dress, holding a tissue to her face. She stepped in front of the bright cameras, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "It is entirely true," Patricia cried, looking directly into the camera lens. "I am her mother, and it breaks my heart to say this, but Maya has always been deeply disturbed. She is unstable and extremely dangerous. We tried to get her psychiatric help for years, but she refused. She is hiding behind fake corporate titles to cover up her illegal financial activities. She destroyed my youngest daughter's beautiful life out of pure spite. We just want her to face swift justice." My own mother had brought the local news to my son's school to publicly assassinate my character. She was trying to destroy my reputation so completely that I would be forced to surrender my company to my father just to make the media circus stop. The PTA mothers gasped in horror, nodding along with Patricia's vicious lies. The reporter turned back to me with a hungry, eager look in his eyes. "How do you respond to your own mother's severe claims, Maya? Are you currently under criminal investigation for financial fraud?" I stood my ground. I did not raise my voice, and I did not look away. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Capital," I said firmly. "My business is entirely legitimate and highly successful. My sister and my mother are lying on television today because I refused to fund their extravagant, greedy lifestyle." Patricia scoffed loudly, waving her hands. "Do not listen to her," she cried to the reporter. "She is a bitter, angry liar who hates seeing anyone else happy. She chased away a good, honest man who truly loved my daughter." Suddenly, the loud screech of expensive tires echoed through the quiet parking lot. A sleek, silver Aston Martin pulled up right behind the news van, blocking it in completely. The heavy car door swung open. The PTA mothers gasped again. The reporter spun around, signaling his cameraman to quickly change angles. Walking toward the eager crowd, looking sharp in a tailored charcoal suit, was Julian Sterling. He looked nothing like the terrified runaway groom from the night before. His jaw was set tight, and his blue eyes were blazing with pure, unrelenting anger. Patricia gasped, dropping her wet tissue. Her fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by sheer panic. "Julian, you came back to us. Please tell the press what this horrible woman did to you. Tell them how Maya threatened your family." Julian ignored Patricia entirely. He walked straight up to the reporter and grabbed the microphone right out of his hand. The cameraman zoomed in closely on his serious face. "Maya Caldwell did not sabotage my wedding," Julian announced, his deep voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "She did not bribe me, and she is not jealous of anyone. She is a brilliant financial executive who actually saved my life last night. She saved me from marrying an absolute fraud." Patricia turned pale. "Julian, what are you saying?" she stammered, taking a step back. Julian reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of bank statements printed on official Sterling Corporation letterhead. He held the papers high in the air for all the cameras to capture clearly. "Chloe Caldwell is not a victim," Julian declared, staring directly at my mother with fierce disgust. "She is a criminal. My family company runs a charitable foundation for pediatric cancer patients. Last night, my accounting team discovered a massive discrepancy in our charity ledgers. Chloe used her access as my fiancé to secretly wire $500,000 from the cancer charity directly into her personal offshore accounts. Maya simply stopped me from marrying a thief." The entire parking lot went dead silent. The wealthy PTA mothers stared at Patricia. I simply smiled. "We will just use your retirement pension, Dad." Chloe snapped back, rolling her eyes, not looking up from her bright, glowing screen. "Just transfer the funds from your retirement account to cover the lawyer fees. We will get the house back by tomorrow morning." Marcus's face turned a dangerous shade of dark purple. The veins in his neck bulged as he marched across the dirty carpet. He snatched the phone right out of Chloe's hands, throwing it onto the bed. "What retirement pension, Chloe?" he roared loudly. "You know damn well there is absolutely no retirement pension left." Patricia suddenly stopped crying and looked up. "What are you talking about, Marcus? What happened to your pension? Ask your perfect daughter, Patricia. Ask her exactly how she convinced me to drain my entire $400,000 retirement fund last year. She promised me a guaranteed cryptocurrency investment. She said we would triple our money before her wedding. I gave her everything. And she blew it all to fund extravagant bachelorette parties and buy designer shoes to impress Julian's snobby family. It was not my fault the crypto market crashed," Chloe yelled back. "You gave me the money willingly. Do not try to blame me just because you are a pathetic failure who could not keep his own house." The sound of the slap echoed sharply in the small motel room. Marcus struck Chloe across the face with the back of his hand. It was a hard, violent hit, sending her stumbling backward against the cheap, thin drywall. Chloe grabbed her cheek, staring at her father in absolute shock. Patricia shrieked, rushing forward to shield her youngest daughter. "Marcus, have you completely lost your mind?" Patricia screamed, pushing him away. "Do not you dare touch her. This is all Maya's fault." As Patricia continued screaming, blindly defending the daughter who bankrupted them, Chloe's phone suddenly rang on the bed. The bright screen illuminated the dark room. An unknown number flashed across the display. Chloe pushed past her mother and quickly snatched the phone. "Hello," she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "Miss Caldwell," a stern male voice spoke loudly through the receiver. "This is Detective Hayes. We tracked the $500,000 you illegally wired from the Sterling Pediatric Cancer Foundation." Chloe panicked. "What do you mean?" The detective replied coldly. "Travis just emptied your entire offshore bank account and successfully fled today." 1,000 words. Travis had taken the $500,000 and vanished into thin air, leaving my parents and Chloe. They realized that Travis was gone, but his legal rights as Leo's biological father could still be manipulated. They would use family court to rip my son away from me and demand a massive child support settlement. They reached out to the one person who hated me just as much as they did. Beatrice, Travis's mother. Beatrice was a wealthy white woman who lived in an estate in Connecticut. When Travis and I were married, she refused to attend our wedding, citing a fabricated illness. She constantly made derogatory remarks about my hair, my neighborhood, and my culture. Now she sat in the courtroom looking at me with the exact same disgust, ready to steal the child she had completely ignored for 6 entire years. The moment my parents told Beatrice about my multi-million-dollar financial empire, her sheer greed easily overpowered her prejudice. She eagerly paid for their high-powered family lawyers. 2 weeks later, I walked into the downtown family courthouse. I wore a tailored black suit and sat next to my legal team. Across the aisle, my mother Patricia, my father Marcus, and my sister Chloe sat shoulder to shoulder with Beatrice. They all looked incredibly smug, whispering to each other and shooting me venomous glares. Beatrice wore a ridiculous pearl necklace and a pastel pink suit. The judge, a stern-looking older man, called the court to order. The custody hearing for my 6-year-old son Leo officially began. Beatrice was the very first person to take the witness stand. "Your Honor." Beatrice began, her voice shaking with fake sorrow. "My son Travis is currently out of the country on a business venture, but he asked me to fight for his child. Maya is simply not equipped to raise a boy of mixed heritage. She comes from a very aggressive background. Her living environment exposes my grandson to unacceptable urban influences. She lacks the proper pedigree and refinement to raise a child of his social standing. I need to take Leo into my care to ensure he grows up in a civilized, respectable home." My lawyer immediately objected to her blatantly racist remarks, but Beatrice just smiled triumphantly as she stepped down from the stand. But the true betrayal was yet to come. The opposing counsel called their star witness to the stand. My own mother, Patricia. Patricia walked up to the microphone. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then she looked right at me and delivered the most evil lie I had ever heard in my entire life. "Your Honor!" Patricia cried, gripping the edges of the wooden stand. "It breaks my heart to testify against my own flesh and blood. But Maya is an unfit mother. She has been battling severe substance abuse for the past 5 years. She hides her drug addiction behind her corporate job. She frequently leaves my grandson locked in her house alone while she attends wild parties. She is dangerous, unpredictable, and prone to violent outbursts. I am begging you to grant full custody to Beatrice. It is the only way to save my innocent grandson from a drug-addicted mother." The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. I had spent my entire adult life building a clean, highly disciplined professional career to ensure Leo had everything he ever needed. Yet here was the woman who gave birth to me staring directly into the eyes of a powerful judge, swearing on a holy Bible that I was a neglectful monster. The courtroom erupted into loud gasps. My own mother was committing blatant perjury, trying to have my child stripped away from me just so she could get a cut of Beatrice's child support demands. Chloe smirked from her seat, crossing her arms in pure victory. Marcus nodded solemnly, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. They thought this mountain of vicious lies would force the judge to rule against me immediately. I did not react. I did not yell or defend myself against the horrific accusations. I simply turned to my lead attorney and gave him a short, firm nod. My lawyer stood up, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor," he said, his voice echoing clearly across the large room. "The defense calls our final witness to the stand, Julian Sterling." The smug smiles on my family's faces vanished instantly. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung wide open. Julian strode down the center aisle wearing a sharp navy blue suit. His expression was completely unreadable, cold and calculating. He carried a small silver audio recorder in his right hand. Patricia gripped the edge of the witness stand so hard her knuckles turned entirely white. Chloe actually gasped out loud, sinking much lower into her wooden chair. Julian took his place at the stand and handed the small silver device to the court bailiff. "Your Honor," Julian said, looking directly at my deeply trembling mother, "I have a digital audio recording that completely contradicts everything this woman just testified under oath. Last week, before Travis fled the state with stolen charity funds, I hired a private investigator to track his movements. The investigator managed to place a hidden listening device inside the cheap motel room where Patricia and Chloe were staying. The bailiff connected the device to the court audio system and pressed play. The sound of static filled the room, followed by Patricia's voice echoing loudly through the entire courtroom. "You just make Maya go completely crazy, Travis. You take that boy away from her by any means necessary. Once you win the custody battle and she is forced to pay you massive child support, I will personally make sure you get a 10% cut of her entire investment fund. We will destroy her life together and finally get what we all rightfully deserve right now." The sound of Patricia's voice faded into absolute dead silence. The heavy wooden courtroom doors settled on their hinges. Everyone stared at the witness stand in sheer disbelief. The audio recording had exposed the entire extortion plot. My mother was caught on tape offering my abusive ex-husband 10% of my corporate empire to kidnap my son. Beatrice, who just spent 20 minutes insulting my culture, turned chalk white. She physically recoiled from my family. She looked at Patricia and Marcus in pure, unfiltered horror. Beatrice realized my family did not care about her grandson at all. They had just used her deep pockets to fund a blackmail scheme. "Your Honor," Beatrice stammered, standing up quickly. "I had absolutely no knowledge of this arrangement. I was told Maya was a severe drug addict. I was only trying to protect my lineage." "Sit down immediately," the judge roared, his voice booming across the high ceiling. "Do not speak another word in my courtroom unless you are directly addressed." Beatrice sank back into her chair, completely silenced. Her arrogant, racist facade was entirely shattered. The judge turned his furious glare toward the witness stand. He stared at Patricia, who gripped the wooden ledge with trembling hands. Her smug confidence completely evaporated. "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge said, his voice dangerously low and sharp. "You just swore your daughter was an unfit mother battling substance abuse. Yet this audio recording clearly proves you are orchestrating a hostile financial takeover using a 6-year-old child as leverage. Explain yourself right now." Patricia immediately burst into theatrical tears. She covered her face, sobbing loudly to manipulate the court. "Your Honor, you have to understand," Patricia cried. "I was coerced into saying those things. Travis is a highly dangerous man. He threatened us. He told us he would hurt our family if we did not help him get custody of Leo. I am just a terrified grandmother protecting my daughter from his wrath. We had no choice but to play along with his sick game." "Liar!" Chloe screamed from the defense table, jumping to her feet. "Mom, you literally came up with the 10% payout idea. You said we needed Travis to break Maya mentally so she surrenders Apex Capital. Do not try to pin this on me." Order! The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down hard. "I said order in this court." But the Caldwell family was already imploding. They were cornered rats turning on each other to survive. Marcus, my own father, furiously pointed his finger at his wife and his youngest daughter. "Your Honor, I had no part in this extortion," Marcus yelled, distancing himself from the sinking ship. "I am a respected businessman. My wife and youngest daughter are completely out of their minds. They have been acting erratically ever since they lost their suburban home. I told them not to associate with Travis. I am an entirely innocent bystander." Patricia gasped, dropping her hands from her tearless face. "You coward!" she shrieked at her husband. "You paid for Travis's plane ticket to Seattle. You drove him to Maya's house." Marcus turned extremely red and raised his fist as if he were about to strike Patricia right there in the courtroom. Several court bailiffs stepped forward ready to intervene. The chaotic display was completely pathetic. My lead attorney stood up smoothly, cutting through the shouting match. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a thick stack of printed documents. "We also have certified bank statements confirming that Patricia and Marcus Caldwell recently liquidated their remaining assets to fund Travis's legal fees. They willfully bankrolled this fraudulent custody petition solely to extort my client Maya Caldwell. The witness, Julian Sterling, can attest to the authenticity of the audio recording, as his private investigator procured it legally." Julian stood tall and gave the judge a firm nod of confirmation. He looked at my family with utter disgust before walking back to take a seat directly behind me. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely calm. I did not need to scream or cry to win this battle. The truth was doing all the heavy lifting for me. The judge took off his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. He looked down at my family with an expression of profound revulsion. "I have presided over family court for 22 years, the judge began, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "I have seen bitter divorces and angry relatives, but I have never in my entire career witnessed a family so deeply corrupted by greed that they would willingly destroy their own flesh and blood. You came into my courtroom and committed blatant perjury to traffic a child for corporate equity. Patricia started to sob again, but the judge immediately raised his hand, silencing her. Save your tears, Mrs. Caldwell, the judge commanded sternly. I am delivering my ruling. This custody petition is dismissed entirely with prejudice. Beatrice, your involvement in this malicious litigation is appalling. You are ordered to pay all of her attorney fees. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest, but she did not dare argue. Furthermore, the judge continued, picking up his pen to sign the official decree. I am issuing an immediate federal arrest warrant for Travis on the charges of severe extortion and child endangerment. Patricia Caldwell, I am officially referring your sworn testimony to the district attorney for felony perjury charges. You will likely face prison time. Patricia's knees buckled. She collapsed against the wooden railing of the witness stand, gasping for air as the reality of a prison sentence crashed down on her. And finally, the judge slammed his gavel down with a deafening crack. I am granting Maya Caldwell and her son Leo a permanent maximum security restraining order against Patricia Marcus and Chloe Caldwell. If you come within 1,000 feet of Maya, her son, or her corporate offices, you will be arrested without bail. This court is permanently adjourned. The federal arrest warrant for Travis and the perjury warning for my mother sent my family into a tailspin. They were out of options. Their bank accounts were frozen, their luxury home was gone, and their reputation was destroyed. I returned to my life focusing on running Apex Capital. My corporate headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a massive glass skyscraper in downtown Seattle. The main lobby was a stunning expanse of polished black marble featuring a digital LED screen that spanned the back wall. It was a fortress of success. I was standing on the second-floor balcony overlooking the main lobby, having a quiet discussion with my lead analysts. Suddenly, the heavy revolving glass doors at the front entrance were aggressively shoved open. The loud commotion instantly drew the attention of the 50 employees moving through the atrium. I looked down and felt a cold wave of disgust. Marching into my pristine corporate lobby looking disheveled and frantic were Patricia Marcus and Chloe. They had bypassed the front desk and planted themselves right in the center of the marble floor. Maya Patricia screamed at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing off the high glass ceilings. "Maya, get down here!" My security team rushed forward, hands on their radios, ready to physically remove the intruders. I raised my hand, signaling the head of security to hold his position. I slowly walked down the grand glass staircase, my heels clicking sharply against the steps. I wanted everyone to see exactly how pathetic my abusers had become. As I reached the bottom step, Patricia threw herself onto the hard floor. She fell to her knees, clasping her hands together in a theatrical display of desperation. Marcus stood behind her, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and unshaven. Chloe hovered nervously, looking around at the wealthy corporate environment she desperately wished she still belonged to. "Please, Maya," Patricia wailed, squeezing forced tears for my employees to see. "Have mercy on us. We have nothing left. We are eating out of garbage cans. We are sleeping on the concrete. You are a billionaire. You have an empire. How can you be so cold-blooded? How can you sit up in your ivory tower and watch your own flesh and blood starve to death?" The lobby went silent. Dozens of my employees stopped in their tracks, whispering and exchanging shocked glances. Patricia was trying to weaponize public shame. She wanted my staff to think I was a ruthless monster who tortured my helpless parents. She thought if she caused a big enough scene, I would write them a check just to make the public embarrassment go away. I stood still, holding my tablet. I did not flinch. I did not look embarrassed. I simply stared at her with absolute indifference. Chloe realized Patricia's crying was not breaking my composure, so she decided to escalate the performance. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic gasp. She clutched her chest, swaying on her feet before intentionally collapsing onto the cold marble floor. She lay there perfectly still, pretending to have fainted from sheer starvation and emotional exhaustion. My baby Patricia shrieked, crawling over to Chloe and cradling her head. "Look what you have done, Maya. You are killing your own sister. You are a sociopath. You have destroyed this family. Give us the money to survive, or we will die right here on your doorstep." Marcus pointed a shaking finger at me. "You have to help us, Maya," he demanded. "Your sister is sick. You owe us your corporate wealth." My head of security stepped forward. "Ms. Caldwell," he said quietly, "do you want me to call the police and have them escorted out?" "No," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. "Let them stay. I want them to see this." I turned to my executive assistant who was standing by the reception desk. "Turn on the main lobby screen," I commanded. The massive LED screen behind the reception desk flared to life, illuminating the entire atrium with a bright blue glow. Patricia stopped crying and looked up. Chloe magically recovered from her fainting spell, opening her eyes to stare at the giant screen. Marcus frowned, stepping forward in confusion. "I am not the one who destroyed this family," I announced, staring directly at my father. "I am not the one who stole your future, Marcus. You spent your life treating me like garbage so you could worship the ground Chloe walked on. You bankrupted yourself to fund her lifestyle. But let me show you exactly how your golden child repaid your blind loyalty." The screen played a high-definition security video. The footage was time-stamped 3 weeks ago, right before the wedding disaster. It showed the dark interior of a private parking garage. Chloe was standing next to a sleek black car holding a thick manila envelope. A white man in a sharp suit stepped out of the car. He was the chief executive officer of the main rival company that competed against my father's former business. The video had crystal-clear audio. "You have the proprietary formulas?" the rival executive asked, handing Chloe a heavy silver briefcase. "Every single one of them," Chloe said on the screen, smiling greedily. "I copied all my dad's trade secrets and his exclusive client list directly from his home office safe. He trusts me completely, so he never locks it when I am around. This will put his company out of business permanently." The executive opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of $100 bills. "$250,000 in cash, just like we agreed," he said. Chloe snatched the briefcase. "Pleasure doing business with you," she laughed before strutting away. The video ended, and the massive screen went black. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Marcus stood frozen. His eyes were wide with agonizing realization. The daughter he had sacrificed everything for, the daughter he had chosen over me, had secretly sold his life's work to his greatest enemy for a quick payout. She had plotted his financial ruin while smiling right to his face. Marcus turned his head slowly, looking down at Chloe, who was still sitting on the marble floor. Chloe scrambled backward, her face completely drained of color. "Dad," she stammered, her voice shaking with genuine terror. "Dad, I can explain. I just needed the cash for the wedding." Marcus let out a guttural cry. His knees buckled under him and he collapsed onto the floor, utterly broken. Marcus let out a guttural cry. His knees buckled and he collapsed onto the floor, broken. His anguish echoed through the marble lobby of Apex Capital. He knelt staring at the blank screen that had just broadcasted his ultimate betrayal. Chloe, his golden child, had sold his legacy for a briefcase of cash. Patricia scrambled to her knees, reaching for her husband's shoulder. Marcus violently shoved her hands away. "Do not touch me," he roared, his voice hoarse. "You bred a monster, Patricia. You turned her into the greedy parasite and destroyed my life." Patricia scrambled backward, weeping in panic. Chloe did not try to apologize. She looked at her father's shattered expression and ran. She bolted toward the glass doors, leaving her parents crying on the floor. I watched her flee without a single ounce of pity. My head of security escorted my weeping parents out of the building. The show was officially over. I returned to my office and spent the afternoon finalizing the Sterling restructure. I needed to pick up Leo from his elementary school by 3. The sky was painted in harsh shades of gray as I drove toward the campus. I parked near the front gates. A familiar silver Aston Martin pulled into the spot next to mine. Julian Sterling stepped out wearing a tailored suit. He gave me a tired smile. "I tracked your schedule through your assistant," Julian said, walking over. "We need to finalize the board meeting agenda for tomorrow, but I wanted to check on you. I heard about the incident at your corporate lobby. Word travels fast in this city," I replied. "My family is out of options. Desperate people do foolish things. But I am handling it, Julian. You do not need to worry." Julian looked at me with deep respect. "I know you can handle it, Maya," he said. "I just want to make sure you do not handle it alone." The school bell rang loudly. A stream of uniformed children poured out of the double doors. I saw Leo walking down the concrete steps, holding his blue backpack. His face lit up with joy when he spotted me. "Mommy Leo!" yelled, running across the paved walkway. I smiled widely, crouching down to catch him in a tight embrace. "How is school, my brave boy?" I asked, kissing his forehead. Leo began chattering excitedly about a science project, completely oblivious to the dark storm clouds hovering over our family. Julian smiled at the sight of my son, keeping a respectful distance. I stood up, holding Leo's hand in mine. We turned to walk toward my SUV. Suddenly, a deafening roar pierced the quiet school parking lot. The aggressive revving of a heavy diesel engine made several parents turn around in alarm. I looked down the long asphalt lane. A large white rented moving truck was idling at the far end. The driver slammed on the gas pedal. The heavy truck lurched forward, the rear tires squealing and smoking against the pavement. The massive vehicle accelerated with terrifying speed, barreling straight down the parking lane. It was not slowing down. It was aiming directly at me and Leo. Through the windshield, I saw the driver. It was Chloe. Her face was twisted into a mask of unhinged insanity. Her makeup was smeared, and she gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. She had lost her father, her wealth, and her entire future. She blamed me for every failure in her miserable life, and now she wanted to end mine. I froze for a fraction of a second, paralyzed by the monstrous reality of my own sister trying to murder me and my child. Maya moved. Julian screamed at the top of his lungs. I yanked Leo, pulling him hard against my chest and throwing my body backward toward the brick retaining wall. But the truck was moving far too fast. It swerved sharply, correcting its path to align perfectly with my cornered position. Chloe kept her foot pinned to the floorboard. Then a loud screech of tires drowned out the diesel engine. Julian did not run away. He sprinted straight to his silver Aston Martin and jumped into the driver's seat. He slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the accelerator. His heavy reinforced SUV shot forward like a silver bullet. He drove his vehicle directly into the narrow lane, placing his car squarely between me and Chloe's speeding moving truck. He used his own car as a physical metal shield to protect my son. The impact was catastrophic. The white moving truck slammed into the passenger side of Julian's car with a deafening metallic crunch. Shattered glass sprayed across the asphalt like deadly rain. The violent force of the collision sent Julian's car skidding sideways, smashing brutally into a concrete light pole. The explosive sound of airbags deploying echoed across the panicked schoolyard. Parents screamed, grabbing their children and running for cover. The white truck crumpled upon impact, the front hood folding inward like a crushed tin can. Steam and dark smoke immediately began pouring out of the ruined engine block. I sat on the cold concrete, clutching Leo tightly against my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs. I frantically checked my son, running my shaking hands over his arms and legs. He was perfectly safe in my tight grip. I looked up, gasping for air. The wail of emergency ambulance sirens echoed in the far distance, growing louder by the second. I stared at the horrifying wreckage in front of me. The front end of Chloe's rented truck was completely destroyed, hissing thick black smoke into the cold afternoon air. On the opposite side, the Aston Martin was mangled against the concrete pole. I saw Julian slumped over the steering wheel, trapped inside the crushed metal frame with bright red blood streaming down the side of his pale face. The heavy metal jaws of the rescue tools snapped through the crushed door of the silver Aston Martin. I stood a few yards away, clutching Leo to my chest, watching the firefighters carefully extract Julian from the mangled wreckage. His bespoke suit was soaked in blood from a deep gash on his forehead, and his left arm hung at a terrifying, unnatural angle, but he was breathing. When the paramedics loaded him onto the stretcher, he turned his head slightly and locked eyes with me. He gave me a weak nod before the ambulance doors slammed shut. Another ambulance had already departed, carrying Chloe. Firefighters had dragged my sister out of the crushed cab of the white moving truck. She was unconscious but alive. I did not shed a single tear for her. I only held my son tighter, thanking God and Julian Sterling that Leo was completely unharmed. An hour later, I sat in the sterile white hallway of the Seattle General Hospital emergency room. A pediatric nurse had thoroughly examined Leo and confirmed he did not have a single scratch on him. He was currently sitting quietly beside me drinking a juice box. I had a few minor bruises from throwing myself against the brick wall, but otherwise I was entirely physically intact. A trauma doctor had just come out to inform me that Julian was in stable condition. He had suffered a severe concussion and a compound fracture in his left arm requiring immediate surgery, but he was going to survive. I let out a long breath of relief. I pulled my phone from my pocket to check my company emails, refusing to let this horrific event completely derail my focus. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the emergency waiting room flew wide open. The loud sound made several nurses turn around in alarm. My mother, Patricia, and my father, Marcus, rushed through the entrance. They looked utterly frantic. Their clothes were wrinkled and Patricia's face was flushed red with panic. I stood up from the plastic waiting room chair. I instinctively stepped in front of Leo, shielding my son from the incoming chaos. For a brief, foolish fraction of a second, a tiny part of me thought they were rushing toward us. I thought perhaps hearing that their eldest daughter and their young grandson were nearly crushed to death by a heavy truck had finally snapped them out of their toxic delusion. I thought they were coming to ask if Leo was safe. I was completely wrong. Patricia ran right past me. She did not even glance at Leo. She sprinted directly to the emergency room reception desk, slamming her hands flat on the high counter. "Where is my daughter?" Patricia screamed at the startled triage nurse. "Her name is Chloe Caldwell. She was just brought in from a terrible car accident. Tell me where she is right now. You need to let me see her." "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice," the nurse replied calmly, checking her computer monitor. "Chloe Caldwell is currently in the intensive care unit. She is being treated for blunt force trauma and internal bleeding. She is heavily sedated and you cannot see her at this moment." Patricia let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot. Marcus rushed forward, wrapping his arms around his wife to support her weight. My father looked pale and sickly, the reality of his ruined life clearly taking a heavy physical toll on his body. Then Patricia turned around. Her tear-filled eyes locked onto me, standing quietly by the hallway chairs. Her expression shifted from panicked grief to pure, unhinged hatred. She shoved Marcus away and marched down the hospital corridor, marching straight toward me. She stopped inches from my face, pointing a shaking, manicured finger right between my eyes. "This is entirely your fault," Patricia shrieked, her shrill voice echoing loudly against the sterile hospital walls. "You did this to her, Maya. You pushed your own sister to a dead end." I looked at her blankly. "She tried to run over my 6-year-old son with a commercial moving truck," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "She tried to murder us, Patricia." "She was driven to madness because you stole everything from her," Patricia yelled, ignoring facts completely. "You stole her fiancé. You stole our beautiful house. You threw us out on the streets to rot. You broke her mind and backed her into a corner where she felt she had absolutely no other choice. If anything happens to Chloe, I swear to God, I will kill you myself." Marcus stepped forward, grabbing Patricia's arm. "Patricia, stop it," he hissed, nervously looking around at the hospital staff watching them. "We are in public." "I do not care," Patricia roared, shoving him away again. "She needs to pay for what she did to our family." I did not back down. I stepped forward, forcing Patricia to take a step back. "I did not force Chloe behind the wheel of that truck," I said coldly. "And I did not force her to steal from a children's cancer charity either. Chloe destroyed her own life because you raised her to believe she was entitled to everything." Heavy, confident footsteps echoed sharply down the hallway, interrupting my mother's next vicious insult. We all turned our heads. The local chief of police was striding down the corridor, followed closely by 2 uniformed officers. His face was set in stone. He walked straight up to our group, completely ignoring my father's confused greeting. The police chief reached into his utility belt. The sharp, clicking sound of metal handcuffs echoed brightly in the tense air. He looked directly at my mother. "Chloe Caldwell has been stabilized and is officially out of danger," the chief announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "And she is now officially under arrest for first-degree attempted murder. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Oh, thank God she is alive," Patricia cried out, trying to spin the narrative. "Please, officer, my daughter needs psychiatric help, not a prison cell." Her sister Maya provoked the entire incident. The police chief did not look at me. He stepped right up to Patricia and grabbed her wrists, spinning her around aggressively. "And you, Patricia Caldwell," the chief barked, clamping the cold steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. "You are officially under federal arrest for accessory to a violent crime and for fraudulent assistance in renting the vehicle used in an attempted homicide. You provided the credit card and the false identification Chloe used to acquire that moving truck this afternoon." Patricia froze completely. The color entirely drained from her face. She looked down at the metal cuffs, locking her wrists together, and let out a horrified squeak. Marcus backed away from his wife, lifting his hands in the air to show he was not involved. He stared at Patricia in absolute disgust, realizing she had secretly helped fund the murder attempt against me and his own grandson. "You have the right to remain silent," the chief recited, pulling Patricia toward the exit doors. "I strongly suggest you use it." I stood holding Leo's hand, watching my mother being dragged out of the hospital in handcuffs. 4 weeks passed since the violent collision outside my son's school. The physical injuries healed, but the structural damage to my former family was permanent and absolute. Patricia remained locked in a federal holding facility awaiting trial for perjury and accessory to attempted murder. Chloe was chained to a hospital bed under 24-hour police guard facing a massive prison sentence. But Marcus was still out there. My father had managed to evade direct criminal charges by playing the ignorant victim and throwing his wife and youngest daughter to the wolves. He was completely broke, publicly disgraced, and entirely desperate. I focused my energy on my son Leo and the upcoming corporate takeover. Julian Sterling made a remarkably fast recovery. His left arm was secured in a heavy medical cast, and a pale scar marked his forehead, but his mind was sharper than ever. The Sterling Corporation was bleeding money from the recent public relations disasters, and Julian knew he had to act fast to save his family legacy. We worked closely together, designing a completely new financial architecture for his real estate empire. Apex Capital would inject the necessary capital to keep Sterling Corporation afloat, but the terms were merciless. The upcoming meeting would change everything permanently. We scheduled an emergency shareholder meeting at the Sterling headquarters to vote on the massive restructuring plan. The Sterling boardroom was a cavernous space located on the 50th floor of a downtown high-rise. It smelled of old money, expensive leather, and stale arrogance. Dozens of elderly white board members sat around a massive mahogany table. They murmured angrily to each other, completely displeased with Julian. They hated the media circus that Chloe had brought to their prestigious doorstep. They blamed Julian for nearly marrying a common thief and for dragging their stock prices through the mud. The tension in the room was thick and volatile. Julian stood at the head of the table, adjusting his tie with his one good hand, preparing to defend his position as the chief executive officer. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the boardroom swung open. The security guards hesitated as a man pushed his way inside. It was Marcus. My father wore a cheap, wrinkled suit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. He looked haggard and exhausted, but his eyes burned with a manic, desperate energy. He held a small stack of official financial documents in his right hand. Julian immediately signaled the security team. "You are trespassing, Marcus," Julian said, his voice echoing across the large, silent room. "You do not belong here. Escort this man out of the building." Marcus held up his paperwork with a triumphant sneer. "Actually, I have every legal right to be in this room," Marcus announced loudly. "I liquidated the absolute last of my hidden personal assets yesterday morning. I used every single dime I had left to purchase Class A voting shares in the Sterling Corporation. I am officially a recognized shareholder, and I demand my rightful seat at this table." The elderly board members murmured in confusion. Marcus confidently marched down the aisle and stood near the center of the mahogany table. He looked around the room, locking eyes with the oldest and most conservative investors. He was playing his final desperate card. "Gentlemen," Marcus addressed the wealthy crowd, his voice dripping with false concern. "We all know why we are losing millions of dollars today. It is because of Julian Sterling. He lacks the judgment and the discipline to run this empire. He entangled your pristine company with a family of criminals. My own wife and daughter deceived him easily because he is weak and easily manipulated. Julian allowed a public scandal to destroy your stock value. He is a huge liability to your portfolios. Several board members nodded slowly, agreeing with the harsh assessment. Julian stood his ground. His jaw clenched tight, but he let Marcus continue digging his own grave. "I propose an immediate vote of no confidence," Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "We need to strip Julian Sterling of his executive power right now. We must remove him as chief executive officer and install new leadership to restore public trust. I have the proxy votes from 3 other minor shareholders who agree with me. We have enough leverage to block his new restructuring plan and force him out." Marcus looked incredibly smug. He truly believed he had outsmarted us all. He thought he could leverage the old guard's racial and class prejudices against Julian's recent mistakes to force a massive corporate buyout. He wanted to get his money back with a massive premium to save his own pathetic life. Before anyone could call for a vote, the heavy double doors at the back of the boardroom burst open once again. I walked into the room wearing a tailored midnight blue power suit. My heels clicked sharply and rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. The entire room went dead silent. The wealthy old men stared at me in shock, recognizing my face from the financial news networks. They knew exactly who I was, and they knew I held the purse strings to their entire corporate survival. I did not stop walking until I reached the very front of the room. I bypassed Julian and walked straight to the large leather chairman's seat at the absolute head of the table. I sat down, crossing my legs and folding my hands neatly on the mahogany wood. Marcus turned entirely pale. He took a shaky step backward, dropping his documents onto the floor. "Maya," he gasped, his voice cracking with fear. "What are you doing here?" I looked directly into his panicked eyes, offering a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Your shares are very meaningful, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent boardroom. "I admire your determination to buy your way into this room. It was a very clever strategy. For a fraction of a second." Marcus swallowed hard, his hands beginning to tremble. "What do you mean?" he stammered. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "It means your shares were meaningful until I decided to execute my executive authority as the new majority owner of this company." I explained slowly, letting every single word sink into his desperate mind. "I authorized a massive issuance of new corporate shares at 6 o'clock this morning. I injected $50 million of Apex Capital funds into the Sterling accounts. In doing so, I completely diluted the existing shareholder equity. The shares you bought yesterday are now mathematically worthless. Your entire stake in this company was just diluted down to 0.01%. You spent your last remaining dime to buy absolutely nothing." Marcus let out a choked, agonizing gasp. He clutched his chest, stumbling backward, as the sheer reality of his total financial ruin crushed him. I turned my head and looked at the 2 large security guards standing by the doorway. "Gentlemen," I commanded coldly, "please escort this stranger out of my building." The heavy oak doors of the King County Courthouse swung shut, sealing the fate of my younger sister. 6 months had passed since the brutal collision in the school parking lot. The physical wreckage had been cleared away, but the legal reckoning had finally arrived. I sat in the very first row of the gallery, holding my head high. Julian Sterling sat right beside me, wearing a sharp-tailored suit. His left arm was completely healed now, a silent testament to the horrific violence we had barely survived. Across the aisle, my parents Marcus and Patricia sat huddled together. They looked like 2 hollow ghosts. Marcus had aged 10 years since the boardroom disaster. Patricia kept wringing her hands, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom. They had drained the absolute last of their borrowed funds to hire a desperate defense attorney for their precious golden child. Then the side door opened. 2 armed bailiffs escorted Chloe Caldwell into the courtroom. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. My sister, the woman who had spent her entire life obsessed with designer brands, Luxury vacations and social superiority looked completely unrecognizable. She wore a dull orange county jail jumpsuit that swallowed her thin frame. Her expensive hair extensions were gone, leaving her natural hair pulled into a messy, uneven bun. Her face was completely bare, devoid of the expensive makeup she used to mask her ugly personality. She looked exhausted, pale, and entirely defeated. She refused to look in my direction, keeping her eyes glued to the scuffed wooden table in front of her. The presiding judge called the court to order. The trial for attempted murder, corporate espionage, and grand larceny officially began. The prosecuting attorney laid out a flawless chronological case. He presented the stolen charity funds, the corporate sabotage, and the violent attack in the parking lot. The evidence was mountainous and completely undeniable. But Chloe's defense attorney, a sleazy-looking man named Robert, stood up to deliver his counter-narrative. He paced back and forth in front of the jury box, trying to paint a picture of a tragic victim. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Robert began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "My client, Chloe Caldwell, is not a hardened criminal. She is the tragic victim of a severe psychological breakdown. For her entire life, she lived under the crushing, tyrannical shadow of her older sister, Maya Caldwell. Maya is a ruthless billionaire who uses her financial power to isolate, manipulate, and torture her own family. Maya deliberately destroyed my client's wedding. She bought out the Sterling Corporation just to humiliate Chloe. The immense psychological torture drove my client into a state of temporary insanity. Chloe did not want to hurt anyone. She was simply crying out for help." Patricia nodded vigorously from her seat, trying to support the ridiculous lie. I just sat there, completely unbothered. I knew Robert was playing a losing hand. The prosecution called their primary witness. The bailiff called my name. I stood up, smoothed my designer blazer, and walked confidently to the witness stand. I placed my right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the absolute truth. I sat down, adjusting the microphone. Robert immediately went on the attack. He strutted up to the stand, pointing an accusing finger at me. "Ms. Caldwell," he barked, "is it not true that you purposely hid your massive wealth to watch your family struggle? Is it not true that you orchestrated a hostile takeover of the Sterling Corporation purely out of bitter jealousy over your sister's interracial relationship?" I looked at him with sheer amusement. I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "No," I replied clearly. "That is an absolute lie. I hid my wealth because my family is composed of greedy, manipulative narcissists. If they knew I had money, they would have bled me dry. And I did not sabotage the wedding. Chloe sabotaged her own wedding when she decided to steal $500,000 from a pediatric cancer charity." Robert turned red. "That is speculation," he stammered. "It is heavily documented fact," I shot back, my voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "My legal team submitted the bank wire transfers into evidence yesterday, but if you want to talk about psychological torture, let us look at the facts. Chloe did not have a mental breakdown. She is a highly calculated predator." I turned my head to look directly at the 12 members of the jury. "Chloe Caldwell contacted my abusive deadbeat ex-husband. She gave him my home address and tried to help him kidnap my 6-year-old son. When that failed, she went on social media and posted fake videos crying about reverse racism to incite a dangerous internet mob against me. When that failed, she broke into her own father's safe and sold his corporate trade secrets to a rival company for a briefcase full of cash. And when she finally realized she had run out of people to extort, she rented a heavy commercial moving truck. She waited outside an elementary school and stepped on the gas pedal, intending to crush me and my child against a brick wall." I locked eyes with Chloe, who was trembling violently in her seat. "That is not temporary insanity," I declared fiercely. "That is premeditated, calculated evil." She knew exactly what she was doing every single step of the way. Robert had absolutely no rebuttal. He stammered a weak dismissal and scrambled back to his seat, completely humiliated. The prosecution rested their flawless case. The jury deliberation took less than 2 hours. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating as the 12 jurors filed back into their designated seats. The jury foreperson, an older black woman, stood up holding a folded piece of paper. She looked directly at the judge. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The judge asked, his voice echoing loudly. "Yes, Your Honor, we have," the foreperson replied clearly. "On the charges of wire fraud and grand larceny, we find the defendant, Chloe Caldwell, guilty. On the charge of corporate espionage, we find the defendant guilty. And on the charge of first-degree attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty." A collective shocked gasp swept through the courtroom gallery. Chloe let out a loud, horrific wail, collapsing forward onto the defense table. She sobbed uncontrollably, burying her face in her shackled hands. The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down, demanding order. He looked down at my sister with absolute disgust. "Chloe Caldwell," he announced sternly, "you have displayed a level of greed and malice that is truly sickening. You exploited a cancer charity, betrayed your own father, and attempted to murder an innocent child in broad daylight. You are a profound danger to society. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." A piercing, blood-curdling scream ripped through the courtroom. It did not come from Chloe. I turned around to look at the gallery. Patricia, my mother, had stood up, clutching her chest. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head. She collapsed, passing out cold and crashing hard onto the floor. 3 weeks after Chloe was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, the final loose end of my long nightmare was violently tied up. Travis, my deadbeat ex-husband, had been on the run ever since he emptied Chloe's offshore accounts. He thought he was completely untouchable. He thought he could steal $500,000 from a pediatric cancer charity and simply vanish into the wind. But running requires discipline, and Travis was fundamentally a lazy, arrogant fool who always gave in to his worst vices. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tracked him down to a cheap, sleazy casino located just 3 miles north of the Mexican border. He was sitting at a high-stakes poker table surrounded by empty whiskey glasses and cheap cigars when federal agents swarmed the crowded floor. They tackled him right out of his chair, seizing the duffel bag of stolen cash he kept hidden by his feet. The news of his dramatic arrest broke late Tuesday evening. Julian called me immediately from his downtown office to deliver the updates. The authorities were extraditing Travis back to King County to face a massive list of severe federal charges. These charges included grand larceny, wire fraud, and his direct involvement in the malicious extortion scheme against my family. He was no longer just a deadbeat father dodging child support payments. He was a high-profile federal criminal who had crossed state lines with stolen corporate funds. The lead detective on the case contacted my legal team the following morning with a surprising request. Travis was aggressively refusing to speak to a public defender. Instead, he was desperately demanding a private meeting with me. He claimed he had highly valuable information regarding my parents, Marcus and Patricia. He wanted to negotiate a favorable deal to save his own skin. My lead attorney strongly advised me against going to the police precinct. He said Travis was just a desperate rat backed into a corner trying to manipulate his way out of a guaranteed prison sentence. But I did not go to the precinct to negotiate any kind of deal. I went because I wanted to look my former abuser directly in the eyes and watch his arrogant facade completely shatter. I wanted him to see the powerful, untouchable woman I had become while he was busy rotting away in a jail cell. I wore a sharp, tailored white suit and walked into the downtown Seattle police precinct with my attorney right by my side. The heavy police presence did not intimidate me in the slightest. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm purpose as I walked down the sterile gray hallways. The police escorted me into a cold, windowless interrogation room. Travis sat hunched over a scratched metal table. He looked absolutely pathetic. His expensive leather jacket was gone, replaced by an oversized bright orange county jail uniform. His face was badly bruised, his hair was greasy, and his hands were firmly shackled to a thick metal ring bolted directly to the table. When the heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, he quickly looked up. His eyes widened slightly, taking in my pristine designer suit and my perfectly calm demeanor. He tried to muster up his old arrogant smile, but his chapped lips just trembled nervously. "Maya," he rasped, his voice sounding dry and pathetic. I knew you would come. You always had a soft spot for me deep down inside. We have history, Maya. We share a beautiful son together. I stared at him with absolute freezing silence. I did not sit down. I stood tall, looking down at him like a bug on the pavement. Travis swallowed hard, his fake smile dropping completely. Listen, Maya, I can help you, he pleaded, leaning forward against his heavy chains. I know things. I know every single dirty secret your parents have been hiding for the past 10 years. Patricia and Marcus have hidden offshore accounts they never declared during their sudden bankruptcy. I can give you the exact account numbers. I can give you the passwords. I can hand them over to you on a silver platter so you can finish them off. He pulled frantically at his handcuffs, the metal clinking loudly against the table. Just tell the district attorney to drop the extortion charges, Travis begged, his voice rising in high-pitched desperation. Tell Julian Sterling to drop the grand larceny charges. You run Apex Capital, Maya. You control the Sterling empire now. You have the power to make all of this go away with one phone call. I will sign away all my parental rights to Leo immediately. You will never see me again. Just get me out of this cell, Maya, please. You need my information to finally destroy your abusive parents. You need me on your side to finish the job. I let his pathetic begging echo against the concrete walls for a long moment. I slowly walked up to the metal table. I opened my designer briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy red folder. I dropped it onto the table right in front of his chained hands. The loud smack of the folder made him flinch physically. I do not need your information, Travis, I said, my voice perfectly steady and ice cold. I already destroyed my parents. Chloe is locked in a federal penitentiary for the next 15 years. Marcus is completely bankrupt working as a nighttime security guard in a slum. Patricia is facing her own perjury trial next month and will likely join her favorite daughter behind bars very soon. I uprooted that entire rotten family tree weeks ago. You are completely irrelevant to my life. Travis stared at the red folder, his eyes darting back and forth in sheer panic. Then what is that? He stammered, his chest heaving. I smiled widely. That is your debt file, Travis. You have no leverage left anymore. Thanks to you, I uprooted that rotten family. Enjoy prison. Walking out of the police precinct after leaving Travis to his miserable fate felt like shedding the final layer of a toxic skin. The chapter of my life involving my abusive ex-husband was officially closed. I drove back to my secure, gated estate in the upscale suburbs. For the next several days, I focused entirely on my son Leo and my growing corporate empire. Julian visited frequently, bringing Leo new science kits and sitting with me on the patio, discussing our upcoming projects. Everything was perfectly peaceful. But the ghosts of my past were not completely gone just yet. It happened on a gloomy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing digital contracts while Leo built a massive fortress out of wooden blocks in the living room. Suddenly, the internal intercom system chimed sharply. My head of residential security spoke through the speaker. Ms. Caldwell, we have a situation at the main front gate. There is a woman here demanding to see you. She is refusing to leave the premises. I immediately pulled up the live security feed on my tablet. My heart turned to pure ice. Standing right outside the heavy wrought iron gates was Patricia, the wealthy, arrogant socialite who used to wear custom designer dresses and command restaurant waitstaff, was entirely gone. Patricia wore a faded, oversized trench coat that looked like it came from a cheap discount bin. Her dyed blonde hair was graying at the roots and pulled back into a messy knot. Her face was gaunt, etched with harsh lines of stress and defeat. She was serving a strict probation sentence for perjury, and the reality of her ruined life had taken a brutal physical toll. I told the nanny to take Leo upstairs. Then I marched toward the security gates. 2 armed security guards stood firmly behind the closed iron bars, watching Patricia with cautious expressions. As I approached, Patricia gripped the cold metal bars. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. Maya, she cried out, her voice hoarse and trembling. Oh, thank God you came out. Please, Maya, you have to listen to me. I stood 10 feet away, crossing my arms. I stared at her with absolute empty silence. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Patricia slowly sank down until her knees hit the cold, hard asphalt. She was kneeling in the cold dirt, begging, "Please, Maya." Patricia wept, gripping the iron bars tightly. "I know I made terrible mistakes. I lost everything. Marcus is gone. Chloe is locked away in a federal prison, and she refuses to even speak to me. I am living in a tiny, miserable room. I am completely alone in this world. You are the only family I have left, Maya. I just want to see my grandson. Please let me see little Leo, just for 5 minutes. I beg of you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn photo album, pressing it against the gate. "Look," Patricia pleaded frantically, flipping open the plastic pages. "I brought your childhood photos, Maya. Look at this one. It is you and me at the park when you were 5 years old. We used to be so happy together before everything got so complicated. I am still your mother. I gave you life. I carried you for 9 months. You cannot just erase me from your heart. I know I lost my way, but blood is blood. A mother and daughter have a sacred bond. You know how deep a mother's love goes. Please forgive an old broken woman." I looked at the faded photograph of a little black girl smiling up at a woman who would eventually try to destroy her existence. Patricia was using the ultimate manipulation tactic. She was trying to weaponize the sacred concept of motherhood to force her way back into my luxurious life. She did not miss me. She missed my money. She missed having a punching bag to control and exploit. I looked down at her kneeling on the pavement. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal clarity that cut straight through the cold afternoon wind. "You do not know the first thing about a mother's love, Patricia," I said, stepping closer to the gate. "A real mother protects her child from monsters. You fed your child to them. You sat in a cheap motel room and plotted with my abusive ex-husband to kidnap my son. You walked into a court of law, put your hand on a Bible, and swore to a judge that I was a neglectful drug addict. You tried to rip my beautiful boy away from me just so you could steal my corporate empire. You are completely out of victims," Patricia gasped, dropping the photo album onto the street, the pictures scattered across the concrete. "Maya, please," she sobbed heavily, burying her face in her hands. I was desperate. I was blinded by fear and pressure. "We are family. You have to let me make it right. You cannot just shut me out forever. I am begging you to show some mercy." I looked at the security guards standing at attention by the gate controls. I gave them a firm, decisive nod. The guards stepped forward, signaling Patricia to back away. The heavy iron gates hummed loudly, engaging the electronic lock. I looked at Patricia. There was no anger left, just profound, chilling emptiness. "You are right about one thing," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "Blood is supposed to mean something, but the day you stood at that wedding and called me a used product, you cut that bloodline yourself. You severed the tie permanently." I took a slow step back toward my estate. "You do not have a daughter anymore," I declared, staring into her horrified, weeping eyes. "You absolutely do not have a grandson, Mrs. Caldwell. You have nothing." I turned my back on her. I did not look back as the gates locked, shutting Patricia out forever. I walked up the driveway, taking deep breaths of crisp air. The toxic weight I carried for 30 years was finally gone. I walked into the living room where Leo was happily building his wooden fortress. I sat beside him, ready to build a new life on my own terms. Over the next 6 months, I poured my energy into raising my son and expanding Apex Capital. Leo thrived in our new peaceful environment. Without my manipulative parents hovering over us, he blossomed into a confident, joyful boy. He started playing piano and joined a soccer league. I attended every single game, cheering loudly, a simple luxury my parents never gave me. Meanwhile, the corporate world was shifting beneath my feet. Taking majority control of the Sterling Corporation was a massive undertaking. Julian and I spent countless hours in my downtown office dismantling the outdated, corrupt structures his family had built. We fired the lazy executives, restructured the debt, and cleaned house completely. During those long late-night strategy sessions, our relationship slowly began to shift. We stopped being just business partners. We became allies who deeply understood each other's profound trauma. Julian was betrayed by his fiancée, and his board members turned their backs on him when things got difficult. I had been completely sold out by the people who gave me life. We were two heavily guarded people who suddenly found absolute safety in each other's company. Julian started coming over to my house on the weekends. He would sit on the floor and help Leo build complex architectural models out of blocks. He treated my son with a level of genuine kindness and respect that Travis never once showed. We never rushed anything between us. We simply enjoyed the rare comfort of being completely understood without needing to explain ourselves. But the wealthy elite of Seattle were not happy with our newfound peace. The old money families, the country club socialites, and the conservative corporate rivals were absolutely furious. They could not stand the fact that a young black single mother had effectively conquered one of the oldest white real estate empires in the state. Since they could not beat me in the boardroom, they tried to destroy me in the social circles. Vicious rumors began spreading like wildfire through the high-end restaurants. The whispers claimed I was a ruthless manipulator. They said I used dirty, illegal tactics to force the Sterling family to surrender their power. They gossiped that I blackmailed Julian, trapping him in a fake partnership. The media started picking up on the gossip. Shady online blogs published articles questioning my financial ethics. Wealthy mothers at Leo's school started giving me dirty looks again, whispering behind their manicured hands. They desperately wanted to paint me as the villain, because acknowledging my actual intelligence and power intimidated them too much. My public relations team went into a complete panic. They begged me to release a carefully worded written statement denying the accusations. They wanted me to play the quiet, humble victim to appease the angry elite crowd. I sat in my corner office listening to their fearful advice. I looked across the glass desk at Julian, who was reviewing the same nasty articles on his tablet. He looked up at me, and his blue eyes were blazing with protective anger. "I am not putting out a written statement," I told my public relations director firmly. "I am not hiding behind a piece of paper, and I am definitely not asking for their approval. I am going to face them directly." Julian smiled a sharp, dangerous smile that perfectly matched my own. 48 hours later, Julian and I hosted a massive live press conference. We did not rent a quiet hotel room. We set up the podium right in the center of the Sterling Corporation grand lobby, forcing the media to stand inside the very empire I now controlled. Dozens of reporters, flashing cameras, and prominent financial journalists crowded into the marble atrium. They were hungry for a scandal, eager to see me sweat under their aggressive questioning. I wore a striking crimson power suit and stood confidently behind the podium. Julian stood right beside me, looking incredibly sharp. A loud reporter from a conservative financial network immediately shoved his microphone forward. "Ms. Caldwell," the reporter shouted aggressively, "how do you respond to the widespread allegations that you used hostile illegal tactics to extort the Sterling family and seize control of their legacy?" Before I could open my mouth, Julian stepped forward and grabbed the microphone. He stared down the arrogant reporter with absolute freezing authority. "Maya Caldwell did not extort anyone," Julian announced, his voice booming through the massive lobby. "My family company was rotting from the inside out. We were drowning in toxic debt and blind arrogance. Maya did not steal this empire. She saved it from total collapse when every other bank in this country refused to help us. She is the most brilliant, ethical, and visionary executive I have ever had the privilege of working with. Anyone who claims otherwise is simply threatened by her excellence." The reporters went completely silent, frantically writing down his fierce defense. Julian turned to look at me, a look of profound respect and genuine affection clear on his face. Then he turned back to the cameras. "We did not call you here today to entertain your racist, baseless gossip," Julian declared firmly. "We called you here to announce the future." I stepped up to the microphone, pulling it closer. "Starting next month, Apex Capital and the Sterling Corporation are breaking ground on a brand new $2 billion commercial project right here in downtown Seattle," I announced smoothly. "We are completely reshaping the financial district and rewriting the rules of corporate development in this city. If our competitors are intimidated now, they better brace themselves because we are just getting started." The flashing cameras and shouting reporters from the massive press conference dominated the evening news cycle. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Julian Sterling and I did not just survive the malicious gossip generated by Seattle's elite, we completely incinerated it. Apex Capital's stock soared, and the Sterling Corporation stabilized under my heavy-handed restructure. I returned to my corner office feeling untouchable, but I knew the wealthy socialites were still quietly seething. They hated that I had outsmarted them on their own turf, and they were waiting for me to slip up. I did not have time to worry about their fragile egos. I was focused entirely on building my legacy and ensuring my son Leo had a future that could never be stolen. A few weeks after the press conference, Julian and I finalized the blueprints for our massive downtown commercial project. We were set to break ground on the $2 billion development, which would completely revitalize the city's financial district. The old money families had tried to block our permits using their political connections, but my legal team crushed their pathetic attempts within days. I was unstoppable. It was a cold Tuesday evening when the ghost of my past decided to haunt me one final time. I was sitting in the back of my chauffeured Maybach, reviewing construction contracts while my driver navigated through the heavy downtown traffic. We were heading to the grand opening gala for our new project. Julian was meeting me there, and I was wearing a stunning emerald green gown, tailored to absolute perfection. As my car approached the venue, I looked out the tinted window and saw a familiar, pathetic sight. Standing on the cold sidewalk right outside the velvet ropes of the exclusive event was my father, Marcus. He was no longer the arrogant, wealthy businessman who had tried to steal my empire. He looked old, frail, and utterly broken. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting security guard uniform. His shoulders were slumped, and he was desperately trying to talk his way past the two large bouncers guarding the entrance. I watched him plead with them, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. He was probably trying to use my name to gain access to the very event he had tried to sabotage. My driver pulled the Maybach up to the red carpet. The paparazzi immediately swarmed the vehicle, their cameras flashing blindingly. I stepped out of the car, ignoring the reporters, and walked straight toward the entrance. Marcus spotted me through the crowd. His eyes widened with desperate hope. "Maya!" he shouted, pushing against the velvet rope. "Maya, it is me, your father. Please, you have to let me in. I need to talk to you." I stopped and turned slowly to look at him. The reporters immediately turned their cameras toward the commotion, sensing a juicy scandal. Marcus looked at the flashing bulbs and puffed out his chest, trying to salvage his shattered dignity. He smoothed down his cheap uniform and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "I am Marcus Caldwell," he announced to the eager press. "I am the man who raised this brilliant woman. I taught her everything she knows about business. I shaped her into the incredible CEO she is today. I am just here to support my successful daughter on her big night." The absolute audacity of his lie was staggering. He was trying to publicly steal credit for my success right in front of the media. He thought if he played the role of the proud, supportive father, I would be forced to let him inside to avoid a public scene. He thought I would hand him a piece of my glory to protect my image. He was dead wrong. I did not smile. I did not look embarrassed. I stared at him with freezing, lethal indifference. A prominent journalist stepped forward holding a microphone. "Mr. Caldwell," the reporter asked sharply, "are you the same Marcus Caldwell who recently filed a fraudulent custody petition trying to strip your daughter of her parental rights? Are you the man who bankrolled a kidnapper to extort her corporate assets?" Marcus froze completely. The color drained from his face. He looked around at the reporters who were now staring at him with undisguised disgust. The journalist pulled out his tablet, swiping to an article. "According to these court records," the reporter continued, "your wife Patricia is facing perjury charges, and your youngest daughter Chloe is currently serving 15 years in federal prison for attempted murder. Is that the family support you are referring to tonight?" The crowd of wealthy guests and reporters began whispering loudly, their eyes full of condemnation. Marcus shrunk under the intense public scrutiny. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to save him from the humiliation. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, do not let them do this to me. I am still your father." I stepped closer to the velvet rope, looking down at him. "You are not my father, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the flashing cameras. "You are just a desperate stranger standing on the wrong side of the rope. You chose Chloe. You chose Patricia. You chose to try and destroy me. Now you get to watch me build an empire from the sidewalk while you work a minimum wage job. I turned to my head of security, who was standing nearby. Remove this man from the premises, I commanded coldly. He is making the guests uncomfortable. The security guards immediately grabbed Marcus by the arms, pulling him away from the entrance. He did not fight back. He just slumped in their grip, completely broken and publicly humiliated. He was experiencing the exact same shame and powerlessness he had inflicted on me for 30 years. I turned my back on him and walked down the red carpet, stepping into the bright lights of my own spectacular success. The flashing lights of the red carpet faded into a distant memory. The harsh, brutal battles in courtrooms and corporate lobbies were finally behind us. 6 months had passed since Marcus was dragged away from my grand opening gala. My life was no longer defined by defense strategies or anticipating the next malicious attack from my own blood. I had built a fortress of absolute peace. It was a bright, warm Saturday afternoon in late May. I stood on the sprawling cedar deck of my private estate, looking out over the lush green backyard. Today was Leo's 7th birthday. I had hired a local catering company to set up a massive taco bar, and a bouncy castle occupied the far corner of the lawn. The air was filled with the smell of grilled meat and the loud, joyful sounds of children laughing. I looked around at the guests mingling on my patio. There were no arrogant country club socialites. There were no judgmental relatives waiting to criticize my single motherhood or my outfit. The guest list was small, completely intentional, and fiercely loyal. My executive assistant, Sarah, was helping a group of kids at the face painting station. My head of security, Marcus, who had protected me from Travis's ambush, stood by the barbecue pit laughing loudly and flipping burgers. He had become like a protective uncle to Leo. For my entire life, Patricia and Marcus had conditioned me to believe that family was a blood-binding contract. They taught me that if I ever stepped out of line, I would be cast out into an unbearable, lonely void. They promised me that without their toxic conditional approval, I would be nothing but a miserable, isolated failure. I took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. I looked at the beautiful, vibrant life I had cultivated. They were completely wrong. Cutting away the diseased roots of the Caldwell family did not leave a gaping, empty hole in my life. It cleared the suffocating weeds so the actual sunlight could finally get through. It created a massive, beautiful space for genuine love to take root. I did not have to shrink myself anymore to make a golden child feel taller. I did not have to apologize for my success or hide my wealth. I was surrounded by a chosen family that respected me, valued me, and genuinely loved my son. A sudden loud cheer erupted from the center of the yard, breaking my internal reflection. I walked down the wooden deck stairs and crossed the soft grass. Leo was jumping up and down, his eyes wide with absolute excitement. Standing right next to him, wearing a casual navy button-down shirt with his sleeves rolled up, was Julian Sterling. Julian had arrived early to help set up the party decorations. The wealthy real estate mogul, who regularly intimidated ancient board members, was currently sitting cross-legged on the grass. He held a massive, heavy, rectangular box wrapped in bright silver paper. "Happy birthday, little man," Julian said, his voice warm and easy. "I know you said you wanted to be an architect when you grow up, so I brought you something to practice with." Leo tore through the silver wrapping paper with pure chaotic energy. He gasped, dropping the torn paper onto the grass. It was a high-end, professional-grade architectural modeling kit. It contained thousands of intricate pieces meant to build a complete, sprawling, modern city skyline. It was incredibly detailed and far more advanced than any standard toy. "This is a real city," Leo shouted, hugging the massive box against his chest. "Thank you, Julian. Can we build the skyscrapers right now?" "We can build whatever you want, buddy." Julian laughed, ruffling Leo's hair gently. "Go set it up on the patio table. I will be right there." Leo sprinted toward the wooden deck, clutching his prize. I stood a few feet away, watching the interaction. My chest tightened with a profound sense of gratitude. Travis, the man who shared Leo's DNA, had only ever viewed our son as a pawn for extortion. Julian, who shared absolutely no blood with us, treated my son like he was the most important person in the entire world. Julian stood up, brushing the grass off his expensive designer jeans. He walked over to me, his blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a sudden beat. He did not look like my corporate co-chair right now. He looked like a man who knew exactly what he wanted for the rest of his life. "You throw a highly successful birthday party," Ms. Caldwell Julian noted, standing close enough for me to smell his rich cedar cologne. "The logistics are flawless." I smiled, looking up at him. "I am a very meticulous planner, Julian. I do not leave anything to chance." "I know you do not," Julian replied, his voice dropping slightly, becoming serious and intimate. "That is exactly why I brought something else with me today. Something just for you." Julian reached into the inner breast pocket of his shirt. He pulled out a crisp, thick white envelope. It was sealed with a dark blue wax stamp. He held it out to me. The heavy, expensive parchment paper felt significant in my hands. "What is this?" I asked, my brow furrowing in slight confusion. "We finalized the Sterling merger contracts on Thursday." "Do not tell me the compliance department found another zoning loophole." Julian stepped even closer, closing the gap between us. I did not move away. "It is a contract," Julian said, his gaze dropping to my lips before meeting my eyes again. "But it has absolutely nothing to do with commercial real estate or Apex Capital." I slowly broke the wax seal and pulled out the document. It was typed on official legal paper, but the words on the page were entirely personal. It was titled A Declaration of Lifelong Partnership. I read the first few lines, my breath catching in my throat. It was a formal, binding promise. It outlined his absolute commitment to stand by my side, to protect Leo fiercely, and to build a future together that went far beyond corporate boardrooms and stock market victories. "I have spent the last year watching you conquer every single demon in your path," Julian said, his voice incredibly soft, but holding absolute certainty. "You saved my legacy, Maya. You saved my life. But I do not just want to be your business partner anymore. I want to be your equal in everything. I want to help you build the city." I looked from the stunning contract in my hands to the man standing before me. The world around us seemed to stop completely. My toxic mother had brutally mocked me in front of hundreds of people, calling me an unwanted used product. She claimed no man would ever desire a strong, fiercely independent black single mother. She was convinced my destiny was a life of lonely, miserable isolation. Yet here was one of the most powerful, wealthy men in the city, handing me a written vow of total devotion. He was not intimidated by my massive wealth. He was not threatened by my unyielding strength. He embraced all of it. I looked over at the patio where Leo was happily unboxing his architectural city model, completely safe and entirely loved. I looked back at Julian, gripping the heavy parchment paper in my hands. A slow, brilliant smile spread across my face. I realized my real life, the one I actually deserved, was just beginning. The warm summer months transitioned into a bitter, freezing winter. My life with Julian and Leo blossomed into a haven of absolute security and immense warmth. We had just finished celebrating our first holiday season together as a newly blended family. Our corporate empire was breaking revenue records across the globe, and our charitable foundation for single mothers was fully operational. I was no longer just surviving my circumstances. I was actively dominating my entire industry. It was a harsh, freezing Tuesday in late December. The bitter Seattle winter had blanketed the entire city in thick gray snow and dangerous ice. I was heading downtown for a final site inspection of our newest commercial housing complex. My driver navigated my sleek black Maybach carefully through the frozen downtown streets. I sat in the heated, luxurious back seat wearing a tailored white cashmere coat and reviewing digital contracts on my tablet. My private security chief rode in the front passenger seat, keeping a watchful eye on the crowded sidewalks. My driver stopped at a red light near a historic stone church in the center of the city. The church was currently running an emergency winter soup kitchen. A long, miserable line of shivering, desperate people wrapped around the frozen city block. I casually looked out through my tinted, heated window. My eyes suddenly caught a highly familiar and pathetic sight: Standing near the very back of the soup kitchen line, huddled closely together for body heat, were Patricia and Marcus. They were entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, wealthy socialites they used to be. The polished country club facade had been completely violently stripped away. Marcus wore a torn, badly stained jacket that offered absolutely zero protection against the freezing coastal wind. His shoes were wrapped in gray duct tape to keep the soles from falling off. Patricia had wrapped a ragged, dirty scarf around her unwashed, graying hair. Her face was gaunt, weathered, and deeply lined with pure, unfiltered misery. They were completely broken, reduced to begging for a hot meal on the freezing pavement. The traffic light turned green, but I immediately tapped the glass partition. "Pull over to the curb," I instructed my driver calmly. I did not want to gloat or scream. I simply wanted to look at the absolute finality of my traumatic past. I wanted to see the natural consequences of their ruthless greed with my own two eyes. My driver smoothly parked the Maybach right in front of the snowy church plaza. I stepped out of the warm, luxury vehicle. The sharp, confident click of my designer boots against the icy pavement instantly drew the attention of the hungry, shivering crowd. Patricia looked up from her hunched stance. Her sunken red eyes widened in sheer disbelief. She slapped Marcus hard on the arm, pointing a trembling, dirty finger at me. Marcus stared at the shiny black Maybach and then at my immaculate cashmere coat. The realization of who I was hit them like a physical blow to the chest. Desperation completely overrode whatever tiny microscopic shred of pride they had left. Patricia and Marcus abandoned their hard-earned spot in the food line. They stumbled across the slippery, snowy sidewalk, rushing directly toward me. My security chief immediately stepped out of the front passenger seat, raising his large hand to block their path. I raised two fingers, signaling my guard to hold his position and let them speak. "Maya." Patricia sobbed loudly, her voice cracking violently in the freezing air. "Oh my God, Maya, please help us. We are freezing to death out here." Marcus fell to his bony knees right in the dirty gray snow. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep them clasped together. "Maya, please," Marcus begged, heavy tears streaming down his freezing face. "We have absolutely nothing left. The state took the last of my wages for the court fees. We got kicked out of the shelter yesterday. We are sleeping under a damp highway overpass. We are starving to death." Patricia fell to her knees right next to him, grabbing the hem of my father's dirty coat. "You have so much money." "Maya," Patricia wept bitterly, looking up at my pristine white coat. "You are a billionaire. You control half the city. Please remember your family. Remember our blood. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Just give us a chance to live like human beings again. We will do anything you want. We are so sorry for everything we did to you." I stood perfectly still. The bitter winter wind whipped fiercely around us, but I felt completely warm and entirely untouched. I looked down at the two miserable people who had spent 30 years trying to destroy my self-worth. They actually thought invoking the word family would somehow melt my heart. They thought seeing them freeze in the dirty snow would magically erase the day they tried to help a criminal kidnap my 6-year-old son. They thought their sudden poverty entitled them to my hard-earned mercy. I slowly reached into my designer handbag. I did not say a single word as I pulled out a crisp new $100 bill. I held it lightly between my gloved fingers. Patricia and Marcus stared at the money with wild, starving eyes. They reached their shaking hands upward, expecting me to hand it over to save their lives. I did not hand it to them. I simply let it fall. The green bill fluttered down, landing gently in the dirty, freezing slush right between Marcus's trembling knees. I reached up and smoothly adjusted my dark designer sunglasses. "You remember wrong," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper that cut straight through the howling winter wind. This family never had room for an unwanted product like me. I turned my back on their horrified faces and stepped into the warm, luxurious interior of the Maybach. The heavy armored car door slammed shut instantly, cutting off their desperate wailing cries forever. 1,000 words. That was the absolute last time I ever saw Marcus and Patricia. They became nothing more than a cautionary tale, a fleeting memory of a life I had completely outgrown. Exactly 1 year passed since that freezing winter day on the downtown sidewalk. The bitter cold of my past was entirely replaced by the brilliant, radiant warmth of a brand new era. It was a beautiful sunny Friday morning in early June. I stood at the center of a massive, pristine courtyard located in the heart of Seattle. This was not just another corporate commercial development or a high-rise luxury apartment building. It was the absolute proudest achievement of my entire professional and personal life. Julian and I had spent the last 12 months pouring our resources and our hearts into building the Apex Sterling Sanctuary. It was a sprawling state-of-the-art residential and legal complex designed specifically to protect and uplift Black single mothers. The campus featured beautiful modern apartments, a fully staffed daycare center, and an entire wing dedicated to providing completely free, aggressive legal representation for women fighting brutal custody battles. I built the exact sanctuary I desperately needed when I was a young, terrified mother trying to escape a deadbeat husband and a highly toxic family. I wanted to ensure that no woman ever had to choose between her child's safety and her own financial survival ever again. The courtyard was filled with hundreds of people. There were local politicians, community leaders, and dozens of young mothers whose lives had already been transformed by our foundation. The air was filled with bright, upbeat music and the joyful sounds of children playing safely on the manicured green lawns. I looked around the vibrant crowd, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound peace. There were absolutely no toxic relatives hiding in the corners waiting to tear me down. Chloe was rotting in a federal prison cell. Patricia and Marcus were entirely erased from the map. Travis was serving his lengthy sentence, paying off his massive debts behind thick concrete walls. They were all completely gone, banished to the miserable lives they had actively chosen for themselves. Julian stood right beside me, wearing a sharp, light gray suit that perfectly matched the warm summer weather. He wrapped his arms securely around my waist, pulling me close. He was no longer just my billionaire business partner. He was my absolute equal, my fierce protector, and the man who loved my son as his own. And standing right in front of us, looking incredibly handsome in a tiny, tailored navy blue suit, was Leo. My beautiful, intelligent boy had grown so much over the past year. He was thriving in an environment built entirely on unconditional love and unwavering support. He held a giant pair of silver ceremonial scissors in his small hands, bouncing on his heels with pure excitement. "It is time to cut the ribbon," Mommy Leo cheered, looking up at me with bright, shining eyes. I smiled brightly, kneeling down slightly to wrap my hands around the heavy silver handles, right over his small fingers. Julian placed his large hand gently over mine. Together, the three of us sliced through the thick, bright red ribbon, stretched across the main entrance of the sanctuary. The entire courtyard erupted into deafening applause and joyful cheers. Confetti rained down from the balconies, sparkling in the bright morning sunlight. I stood up, picking Leo up and resting him comfortably on my hip. I kissed his cheek, feeling a fierce, overwhelming surge of maternal pride. We had survived the absolute worst storms, and we had built an unbreakable, beautiful empire. As the crowd celebrated, a small group of journalists approached the front steps. They were not the vicious, aggressive paparazzi from a year ago. They were respected reporters covering the massive philanthropic impact of our new foundation. A young female reporter stepped forward holding a microphone. She had a kind, highly professional demeanor. "Maya," she began, her voice projecting clearly over the lively crowd. "You have achieved something truly unprecedented today. You took over a massive real estate empire, you completely revolutionized the financial district, and now you have built this incredible sanctuary for marginalized women. You did all of this while navigating immense personal betrayal and raising a child on your own. What was your ultimate motivation? What gave you the sheer willpower to build this massive empire when the people closest to you tried to tear you down?" The courtyard grew quiet as the guests turned to listen to my response. I looked at the young reporter. Then I looked at Julian, who gave me a proud, supportive nod. Finally, I looked at my sweet son Leo resting safely in my arms. I adjusted my posture, standing incredibly tall. I looked directly into the bright lens of the television camera. My voice was perfectly steady, ringing with absolute undeniable power. I did it because for my entire life I was told I was not enough, I said smoothly. I was told that because I am a black single mother, I was a burden. My own family stood on a stage and called me an unwanted used product. They thought they could break my spirit and steal my worth. But they made one fatal mistake. I smiled a sharp, brilliant, lethal smile. Because when people call you unwanted, that is the exact moment you realize you are completely priceless. You realize your value is not determined by their toxic approval or their narrow minds. You do not need anyone to desire you. You only need your own fierce self-respect. And once you find that, you become absolutely unstoppable. I lowered the microphone and turned away from the flashing cameras. I looked proudly at the beautiful, magnificent empire I had built from absolutely nothing. I kissed my sweet son softly on the forehead and walked confidently forward into the bright, gorgeous afternoon sunshine, leaving the dark shadows behind me forever. The greatest lesson I learned is that your value is never defined by toxic people who try to tear you down. When my family called me unwanted, they pushed me to discover my true power. Walking away from abusive relationships does not leave you empty. Instead, it creates space for genuine love and chosen family to thrive. You alone hold the pen to your destiny. If someone treats you like you are worthless, show them you are priceless. Have you ever cut off toxic family members? Share your own story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering journeys.